Every journey begins with a single step. For many, the first step is the greatest challenge. Yet for all, the obstacles, the doubt, and conviction teach us about ourselves. It's these moments in life, a test of our abilities, our mind, when we don't know, but we still proceed, driven by the unspoken, but ignited by the obsession that yields some of life's greatest lessons and rewards. Join me as we explore incredible stories of leaders forging industries, enterprises, and ultimately, themselves. I'm your host, Adam Giery, and welcome to Capital Class. Let's begin. Classmates, welcome to today's episode of Capital Class. There was a time in the not too distant past when schools operated with internal finance and accounting staff, leaders charged with keeping the gears of education in motion. Depending on the people, it impacted the motion. At the state and local levels, these financial leaders shape curriculum, instruction, student outcomes through one powerful tool: funding. Funding is the backbone of teacher salaries, classroom materials, student programs, and school infrastructure. Yet managing these financial resources while ensuring accountability and optimization fell on those very people already tasked at running our schools. It's an incredible challenge for even the most adept administrator. As budget and complexity increased, so did the demands of this role, requiring leaders to navigate both changing policies, funding constraints, and shifting priorities. On today's episode of Capital Class, we are joined by an industry pioneer, someone who recognized these challenges early, built a groundbreaking solution before the market was even ready. She is the founder of Allovue, a company designed to help school districts plan, budget, and manage their financial resources. And today, this legendary entrepreneur is also a group vice president at PowerSchool. Jess, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for that very generous introduction.
Jess, I think you're in a very unique place to talk about just how rapidly the world has changed around education funding. And from your vantage point, I think we talk a lot about it. Schools, I think, get a bad rap at times, that there's somebody who has joined a school administration to do some sort of nefarious activities. Yet my experience has been, it's just too much to manage. From your 10 years of building Allovue, what were you seeing on the ground?
Great question. So I think some important context is that if I go in the Wayback Machine, my first introduction to education in a formal capacity was actually on the education policy side. I did my undergraduate degree and research in education policy. And then after college, I did my master's in teaching and I became a teacher in Baltimore City schools. I was a language arts and social studies teacher, although most people assume I was a math teacher because I'm always yelling at people to do the math and talking about denominators and data. So people are always like, you must have been a math teacher, right? And I'm a nerd for math, but I am also a nerd for language arts and social studies, got all the nerd bases covered. And that's what I taught. And it was interesting because when I was doing my research undergrad, it was right around the time where No Child Left Behind and all of the follow-on activities as a result of No Child Left Behind were all the rage. Everybody was talking about data systems, student data, teacher data, outcomes data galore. And when I got into a classroom, I was smacked in the face with the resource part of the equation. I was buying my own bulletin board supplies before I even got my first paycheck. I was buying my own textbooks on Amazon. I was buying my own paper at Staples. I asked for Post-its for Christmas. And the part of my brain that loves math and is a nerd for algebra was thinking, okay, if we're trying to solve for X on this equation of student achievement gap, why are we seeing different learning outcomes across different student groups. Sure, we can look at the outcomes data, but what's on the other side of that equation? What are the inputs in that equation? What are the resources? And like, have we checked? Just are we sure that the resource gap doesn't mirror the gaps we're seeing on outcomes? Is it possibly that simple? And no one could give me an answer. Everyone kind of looked at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, we don't really look at that data. And I am an absolute research hound. When I have a curiosity about something, I will go to the end of the internet to find out information about this thing. And I literally reached the end of Google trying to figure this out, which I didn't even know you could do. And, mind you, this is 12, 13 years ago. I put all these search terms in and I literally couldn't find anything of substance about education finance. There was like 4 search results. Wow. And I was like, this is a very big gap in information as far as I'm concerned. Like, I don't even understand how we're having questions about outcomes if we're not looking at inputs in the same way with the same degree of scrutiny. And I became completely obsessed with this. And I went down the rabbit hole, Alice in Wonderland style, and never came out. I'm still down in the rabbit hole digging into ed finance data. And that's kind of what brought me here today.
And so when you go down the rabbit hole, and much is made about funding, right? We're coming out of an experiment where, at least in the United States, we've never spent more on funding. What do you see? Is there a corollary?
I think there absolutely is. So I think there's a few different pieces to this. One, let's look at the fact that our expectation for what schools are responsible for and accountable for over the past 50 years has changed dramatically, right? We need to remember that we're still in a moment in time where there are people who are still alive when schools were segregated, when there were no protections for students with disabilities, when there were no resources allocated for low-income students. These are in the span of American history. It's only like the most recent 20% of the country's history that we've paid attention to these populations from an education standpoint and put dedicated resources behind teaching and learning for them and really thinking about opportunities for all students. So this is a relatively new idea in the history of American education. So I think that's one big piece. We've completely expanded our definition of opportunity in education in this country. That's a big piece. That is necessarily going to cost more, right? Obviously, it costs more to pay attention to 100% of students versus 70% or 50% or 30%. We also have seen the advent of the digital age in the past 30, 40 years. That has dramatically changed what schools look like, what they're expected to do from a teaching and learning standpoint, right? All of a sudden, we've added on digital literacy components, technology skills, a whole different level of experiential learning and life skills. We've also raised the bar on what we expect from students in terms of wraparound supports. I see schools that are operating health centers, that are doing winter coat drives, that are feeding kids 3 meals a day. Schools have really become beacons of communities in many places, and they're providing a tremendous broad spectrum of wraparound services for students and their families. I see schools that are operating GED programs at night for parents and community members. So I think our whole definition of what a schoolhouse is and what we expect a school to be able to do when a kid comes on their doorstep has changed dramatically in the past few decades. All of those things are going to require different resources. So I get asked the question a lot, do schools have enough money? When will it be enough? And my question back to that is, for what? Enough money for what? Enough money for if every kid comes to school fed, dressed, on grade level, stable housing, transportation covered to school, access to laundry for their uniforms and their school clothes. And we're just expected to get them from grade level 1 to 2. Probably enough for that. If we want schools to be entire centers of community support, if we want them to make up for places where other social safety nets have failed, not enough. Then we're talking about a very different cost structure, a very different set of outcomes, and a very different set of responsibilities. We're not just asking teachers to get kids from level 1 to level 2. I had students in my middle school classroom who were at a kindergarten reading level. Enough to get a kid 6 or 7 grade levels up in a year or two? No, that is going to require a very different resource level. So
it's funny you bring this up of the measuring stick has changed.
Absolutely.
And I just wonder if what you're bringing up to the point of there was a time, so I too taught, and what was expected of me as a 7th grade history teacher was children would show up for 45 minutes, 47 minutes, and I would work them through the lessons of the day. And by the end of the grading period, I had to have gotten through enough of the curricula, and I knew what was going to be graded, what mattered in the units. And so maybe if we were behind, we would catch up through other items, but that was the expectation. And to illustrate your point, I do remember even as a student, not that long ago, that there was just a different bar set.
Yes.
There were kids who just didn't make it. I mean, I don't want to age us, but like we knew people and it was okay. Like they're not going to make it.
Yep.
And the point that I have made on that is that when we were younger, those jobs, there was a market for I didn't finish, and housing was more affordable and cars were more affordable and foods were more affordable. And so, yes, that person, or maybe they just had gotten the basic requirements, they would go off and have a different life, but they would have a life.
Yep.
Those jobs are gone. And so to the point you're making around the schools are expected to do so much more, it does feel that the educator really has to do the role of, at times, some parenting, which I think creates the policy challenges of what people do or don't want.
Yeah.
They have to do the services of a community, right, that you were describing. And that's hard.
I'll tell you, until 2 years ago, I was still paying a phone bill for one of my students.
Wow.
So teachers, and every teacher I know has gone deep into their own pockets in some way or another to provide services directly to students. So teachers are also personally subsidizing a lot of this. It always comes back to the money piece. Those resources have to come from somewhere. And the direct connection for me was that I saw this happening in real time. I saw teachers going into their own personal time, into their own family and personal budgets to cover these resources to provide the experience that they knew their students deserved. And that was what got me really fascinated with this resource allocation piece is, why are teachers sharing so much of this cost burden? And I used to give people the example of, if you walked into an emergency room and the doctors were expected to bring their own gauze and ibuprofen to work, right? You can't even hear that with a straight face. But so why is that comical?
Right.
Right? That's comical. That's a comical proposition. And yet every day in this country, teachers are walking in with bags of paper, pencils, notebooks. I bought every one of my students a notebook everyone. I had pencils and pens for all of them. Teachers are bare. And, I would stand in line at the dollar store and I'd have 100 of everything, right? Or 130 of every single thing. And every time the person behind me would say, "You must be a teacher."
Wow.
And how insane that this is such a common practice that everybody is just aware that it's happening. Everybody sees it and is just like, that's so nice, right? Whereas like if you saw a doctor walking in with a box of gauze and Band-Aids and like a satchel of scalpels, you'd probably be like,
I'd be very nervous.
Very wrong there,
not the place
right?
I need to be.
So I was just really fascinated by this weird gap and why we have teachers bearing so much of a disproportionate burden of these either extra costs or costs that are misaligned or and you brought up the point earlier of like there's a lot of yelling about well, they're not managing money well, and we just have people who don't know how to manage these funds. I will tell you, I would take any one of the top 100 school district CFOs and put them toe to toe with a Fortune 500 CFO.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
there is so much less waste in a school district budget, or I would say any public sector budget, because there is no waste to be had. There is no cushion. There is no slush. Every single dollar has to be stretched to $2 of value or more. Trade-offs are being made at every turn. And then, you walk into an office of your average tech company in the 90s or early aughts, and they're doing like, smoothie stations and omelet bars, right? And for some reason, we've decided that by nature of being a high growth private or public, company, that you naturally are spending money more efficiently. And I don't know where we got that idea from. I think part of it is because we can't see any of that data. The school district data is all out there in the open. And so people have the illusion that they understand the budget and what's into it. But I think if, Fortune 500 companies had to put every single line item of their budget in front of the public, I imagine there'd be a lot more questions about how that money is being spent. And I think you would find a lot more slush in those budgets than you do in a school district budget where teachers are bringing their own pencils to work.
And so through this lens, because you make a great comparison around the doctor. I mean, I'm maybe too much this case, but I'm a glass 3/4 full person. And I meet teachers, administrators, and they're excited about their job and they're excited to be at school. I mean, what is the bullish case as you see it? Like, you're in these schools, you're meeting with them through your role at PowerSchool now, but obviously continuation in your services at Allovue. And what are you seeing on the ground?
In terms of teacher morale?
Yeah, teacher morale and the kind of even the state of play of education. I mean, in some ways, we're in a very exciting inflection with AI, for as scary as it also can be.
Yeah. So I like to say, you say you're 3/4 full. I am usually the most optimistic and the most pessimistic person in the room.
Okay.
I somehow have this weird ability to like hold two extremes in my head at the same time all the time, which I think is a very useful skill as an entrepreneur, because you're always like planning for the worst, hoping for the best. I think that's actually how I got out of 2020 and the pandemic alive, is I had a many step plan that was planning for the worst and hoping for the best. So on the pessimistic side, I see teachers burning out, right? We are increasingly always asking them to do more with less. Every time there's a new standard that's passed down, or a new expectation, a new test to prepare for, a new form to complete, it's just, we pile things on teachers' shoulders. And we don't change their pay. in a requisite manner, right? And again, in the private sector, if you're given a whole lot more responsibility, there's typically a pay increase that comes with that. That is not the case in education. It's very formulaic around time, years of service, usually. It has very little to do. I see teachers taking on so many wraparound support responsibilities, and they're not compensated for it. They do it out of the goodness of their heart. I think we have a real problem if we are relying on the success of an entire industry being fueled by the goodness of people's hearts.
Yeah.
Because no matter how much of a heart you have, your body will eventually give out on you. You will just burn out taking on more than you can handle. And I do see that a lot with teachers. That's why the attrition rate is so high for early career teachers. On the flip side, I think we do have a lot of opportunity with the technology world and the capacity. And I mean, I got interested in technology because of teaching. I was not at all interested in technology, even as a hobby or personally. Like, it just wasn't really a thing I was interested in until I became a teacher. And then all of a sudden, I started looking into all these EdTech tools and ways that I could get resources to my classroom faster, cheaper, better. And I could download things that I needed on a moment's notice. I found apps that helped me do grading faster to save time. And so EdTech was actually my foray into technology. And I obviously still have a tremendous amount of excitement for that. So I think it is very much a double-edged sword in that we absolutely should be looking to technology for ways that we can create new opportunities and take work off of administrators' plates and off of teachers' plates. I mean, even with the Allovue solution, I can't tell you how many budget directors would tell me, like, yeah, like I can do it. Like I can do it by hand. And it's like, okay, but are you up until 2 a.m. every night doing it? Because that's not a reasonable expectation. Like, what if you could do it better, faster, and be home to have dinner with your family during budget season, right? What if we can get to the same or better outcome a lot more efficiently? That's a great use of technology. So I love the whole sphere of technology where we are creating more capacity for teachers to be able to take on some of these new opportunities without adding to the time burden that is already maxed out for them.
I do worry about this dynamic of who then teaches. And I even see it as a young parent, in that I have young children, that I really am working hard to make sure that I have a great teacher in front of my child. And I genuinely believe you don't take these jobs for any other reason than you really care. That's been my experience. Now, there's millions of teachers, and there are certainly ones that have made questionable choices or worse. But that's also true of accountants and lawyers, right? And so to follow this kind of rabbit hole, you were teaching while running Allovue in the early days?
No, there was a gap there.
Sure.
I left the classroom because I was pretty burned out.
Yeah.
And so I speak from experience on taking on too many things. I left the classroom and I was really at an inflection point with my career because I thought I was going to teach forever, and I was really at a loss as to where to go next.
I did too, by the way.
I knew that I wanted to do something in education. I wanted to do something that had a big impact. And I took some time to really think about it. And the thing that I just kept coming back to over and over and over again was this resource allocation and budget issue. I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would think about it. And I felt so weirdly called to do it. And it seemed so insane because there was no good reason why this thing was something I should do. I mean, everyone that I told was like, "You're going to do what? You're going to start a tech company? Like, do you know how to code? Like, what are you going to do?" And I just kept saying like, I don't know, like, I'll figure it out. And I genuinely, in the earliest days, I thought my role in this work might be like the person who stands up and yells fire in a crowded theater. Like, I thought I might draw attention to the issue. And I was very prepared to like pass the baton if someone came along who was like, oh, like I am uniquely suited to like take this work to its fruition. And that person just never came along. I mean, I was like waving this baton around, like, does anyone want it? Anyone want to pick this up? And no one ever did. And then weirdly, 10 years later, I became the person uniquely suited to bring the work to fruition. It was this very weird evolution where I became the person that I wanted to exist in the world, to care about this work and understand it and bring the solutions to the market.
And I would say this is a common theme from folks on the show.
Yeah.
Right? That there's the founder's personal journey drives them to often begin a journey of maybe even a greater challenge, right? So they had an experience, and the romanticized version of entrepreneurship that you and I have both experienced is quite a bit different than the actual role of entrepreneurship.
For sure.
And so I would love, if you can, take us back to the beginning. Like, what do you remember from those days?
It was running off a cliff without a parachute. I mean, it really, like when I tell you my plan was to rent a room in my house out on Airbnb to survive. That was my big plan. I was going to rent out rooms in my house to pay my mortgage and like figure out the next thing. And it really was one foot in front of the other every day. And I will say the thing that was a really formative part of that first year, that is the unsexiest thing, but I tell every entrepreneur to do it, and the ones who take this advice will be successful. I spent about a year just listening to administrators. Wow. Just listening. I interviewed anyone who would talk to me, and I would sit down with them and I would just ask them a million questions for as long as they would talk to me. And the thing that is so valuable about this is you really start to get the shape of the problem. You start to understand the problem very, very deeply. And it's kind of like this it's like iceberg mapping, right? Because you just see the tip of it. That's what gets your attention. And then when you start doing the interviews, you really start to map all the different angles and edge cases of this thing. And the other thing that's really powerful about this is inevitably, when you talk to enough people, you start to hear the exact same themes over and over and over again, to the point where at some point you can start completing people's sentences. And they're like, whoa, like, what kind of witch are you that you like, how did you know? Like, how did you know what I was going to say? It's like, because 50 other people just said the exact same thing. They just gave me the exact same examples. They just gave me the exact same use cases. They articulated the problem in the same way. And that is how you really start to understand the crux of the problem. And so for me, the crux of the problem, I was really interested in starting with this idea of, like, how can we connect the financial data to the student outcomes data and start looking at trends and correlations and where do we see relationships? That was the thing that got me interested. And then by talking to districts and talking to these administrators, what I eventually pinpointed was they don't have that data. It's buried somewhere in their ERP system, but if they have access to it, it takes hours of manipulation and Excel spreadsheets and VLOOKUPs and all this crazy wizardry just to get basic facts in front of you. And this came up again. Like, I would have people laugh at me like, oh, I don't even have that. I don't even know how much we spend on paper. I couldn't tell you that. I don't know. I got to call this guy and hope he returns my call. And So this came up again and again and again. And then I started thinking about it like Bloom's taxonomy or Maslow's hierarchy, right? Yeah. The stuff that I was really interested in, the stuff that seemed really exciting about this work was top of the pyramid stuff. And what I heard from these customers over and over and over again was, lady, we don't have the first 3 tiers of the pyramid. We don't have the bottom of the pyramid here. Okay, this is like if you walked into a kindergarten classroom and you say, we're going to start analyzing War and Peace. And they're like, what about letters? Like we need to learn our letters. And so if I had not had all those conversations, I would have gone and created some dumb app that addressed the thing that was shiny to me. And everyone would have laughed me out of the room because they would have been like, we don't have that. We can't put that data in there. We don't even have it. We don't know where it is. We don't know what it says. So we went to the bottom of the pyramid and we said, okay, and imagine me going to investors saying, we're going to develop an ETL process for this data. Extract, transform, load. It's a process from getting data from one format to another. And we're going to take this data in this really illegible format and put it in something that's legible. Okay. This is like the unsexiest pitch in the world, right? The investors wanted to hear the top of the pyramid thing too. And I was like, we're not there yet. No one's there yet. We're not ready for that. We got to do the bottom of the pyramid stuff. Not super exciting, right? They were like, you're going to do data visualizations? Like, wasn't this problem solved like 100 years ago? Like, what are you talking about?
I think what's even more impressive, and I think the listeners need to know, like, you were at this, at the time you took investment, I think you were already a few years into the journey.
We took little tiny bits. I mean, those for early years, I was taking in $5,000 checks.
Yeah.
Right. And, by comparison, my peers were taking in $1 million checks.
But this is important in that your journey took about 11 years.
Yes.
And what I experience often is we go to the upcoming named conference. You know what I'm talking about. And there will be some darling that I will be introduced to that everyone has invested in. Yeah. And they are the next thing. And in your tenure, you must have survived and outlasted so many of those.
I was never the darling.
But there's something to be said about that this persistence, partially likely because you were focused on things your buyer needed and valued versus what a technologist thought was interesting, which we do run into very, very often.
Yeah, looking back, it was more a blessing than a curse. It certainly didn't feel that way at the time. I spent many, many years just shaking my fists at the sky and, throwing a tantrum in my room and crying in the shower. And why can't I get the funding? Why can't we be the hot startup that everyone wants to fund? What I could do with all this funding? And the reality is, once 2020 hit, the capital climate did a 180.
Yeah.
And as a result of never really raising what I wanted or felt I needed to really build this thing big and fast, we had to scrape by, we had to scrimp and scratch and claw, and we had to be really capital efficient. And I would talk to founders who had raised 100 times the capital we had and say, how are you doing? How are you doing this? How are you putting out these products? You have 5 people. And we just had to. And I would tell our team, we have to make this work because I don't see anybody else doing it. And I don't see anybody else who cares as much about this. We care the most. So we have to make it work and we have to deliver. And we were just fueled by that mission through many, many very hard years. I mean, there was a year I sold my car to run payroll. We were on that much of a shoestring budget. And there were many years that it took me years to get back up to what I was making as a teacher, which is funny because you'd walk into this room and you have the CEO title and people assume you make a lot of money. And you're like, I'm making less than I did when I was teaching 7th grade. And it took me many, many years to get over even that hump. And so it's a very weird thing because for people who have not been founders, all of what they know is what they see in the news, right? Which is almost exclusively success stories.
I was just going to say it.
You get the occasional like massive catastrophic failure that makes the press, but probably 10 to 1 or 20 to 1, you only hear, we got the funding, we had the exit. And I've kind of taken on the personal mission of being like, there's a lot more out there that you don't see in the press. Right? For every press release you see, there's a million founders having a very bad day and who are on death's doorstep. Right. We were on death's. And the irony is you can be on death's doorstep and then have the headline in the same week. Sometimes you make the Hail Mary pass and all of a sudden you go from the worst day of your life to the best day of your life. Sometimes it happens in the same day. I mean, it is an absolute roller coaster. And we rode that roller coaster for many, many years. And, you know, we were talking a little earlier, when I started this work, you know, if I talked to 100 people and said we were working on this ed finance stuff, one of 100 seemed interested and saw what we were doing and got excited about it. And now, you know, probably 100 out of 100 people, this is a top 5 thing that they're thinking about or doing. And that's in many ways the hallmark of being an entrepreneur is you see the future and you go run towards it and you run through walls with everything you have to make that future a reality. That's almost the definition of what an entrepreneur does. But in those years where you're still living in the pre-future reality and nobody else can see what you're seeing, it's a little crazy making. It is a little crazy making. And probably the best advice I got was don't die. The only rule you need to follow is just don't die. Just live to see another day. And eventually the future gets here. And you seem right on time, which is why this 10-year overnight success phrase is as popular as it is, because it's very true. Almost any time where you see someone overnight, it's because they have been just toiling away for 10 years or more.
I remember our first meeting.
Yeah.
And I remember it for a few reasons. One, that you had already been, let's see, at that point, you were probably already 5 or 6 years in and still just grinding.
Yeah.
And so while I respect your self-assessment that it was a Hail Mary, I have a different memory of you. I have a memory of you at every conference. Yeah. I have a memory of you that making personal relationships with your clients. And you started to have a small cadre of people that were just big believers. And you were very proud to take that show on the road. But it's not for me to disclose, it was still a pretty small business.
Yeah.
And you were working like it was a big business.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot to be said for that mindset. You know, I can vividly remember we were like, I mean, a rink-a-dink business, you know, just we did what we did and kind of all over the place. And that moment when it's, you know, we had products and offerings and pricing and brand, and those things start to carry us forward. And so I would take us to that moment. Like, when did the momentum begin to carry you? Because in the early days of your business, you're carrying it.
Yeah. I think honestly, the pandemic was a big inflection point, and not for the reasons that people think. People, you know, when I say that, people assume it was like, oh, the ESSER dollars.
Yeah.
But it's almost the corollary in that the ESSER dollars shined a very bright light
Yep.
on the finance picture of school districts in a way that really never had been before. All of a sudden, school budgets were in every headline, and people were talking about it on Facebook and talking about it on LinkedIn, and everybody had something to say about a school budget. And we would talk to the CFOs who were like, these conversations are making us realize how little they understand the regular school budget. Because everybody was so obsessed with, this $190 billion, right? It was every day there was a new headline about it, and it sounded like so much money because they kept talking about it in aggregate. But in reality, that money was distributed over 50 million students over 5 years. And so when you looked at it percentage-wise, those ESSER funds on any given year kind of maxed out at like a 5% bonus on the school budget. And, I would say to people, if your boss tomorrow gave you a 5% bonus on your salary, you'd probably be thrilled, right? You probably have a long list of things you can put that money to work for. Maybe you want to fix that roof that's kind of on its last leg. Maybe you want to buy a new appliance. Maybe you want to buy a vacation. Maybe you want to splurge on a nice accessory. But you're not going to move, right? You're not going to change your rent. You're not going to completely shift your lifestyle because, one, you're aware it's a bonus. It's a one-time thing. I'm not going to get it next month. I might not get it next year. And two, it's a relatively small amount of your overall spending picture. And so the CFOs knew that, but the conversation in public was like, this is going to transform everything we know about K-12. And it was like, and the other thing that people had a really short memory on was that they were emergency funds. This is not like the Race to the Top grants where it was like, it's an incentive to do something cool and innovative and change your literacy instruction. This was money that was going towards protective equipment, hygiene supplies. School districts were spinning up vaccine centers, protecting students and teachers through different health measures. I saw districts spinning up laptop programs overnight, doing Wi-Fi enablement in communities. This was not an opportunity to sit back and be like, how could we reimagine reading instruction in most cases?
That's a great point.
It was really plugging holes. It wasn't like we're starting from whole and what can we do above and beyond?
That's a really powerful point, Jess, because there was and has been this parallel of like, well, we tried it.
Yes.
Right. Like, well, we put all this money in, and I think you're bringing up a very, very big highlight, which is these monies were spent, undeniable. Some reverted.
Yeah.
Also because they were accounted for. Was there probably waste? Certainly. Right. Because I don't think for ill intent, although I'm sure someone can prove me otherwise, it was more that they were trying to do so much, so fast, under such a dire circumstances that independent of how you felt about what happened during COVID, I mean, it was a tax. I mean, kids were home. We were home.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really powerful point. And so, Jess, let me take it from here. You called me when you were starting the process to sell. And the only reason why this is memorable for me is that so much of our identities is deeply tied to our business.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine, especially given I'll say burden, I'm sure people would parse words with me on that, but burden that you carried for a long time. Like, what was the end like? And I don't mean it in any real other terms than just, one day you're the CEO of Allovue and the next day you're part of a holistic offering for a powerful company.
Yeah. Well, for one, it's not the end. It was a new chapter. Still
Great
doing the
reframe.
work.
Great reframe.
Still doing the work. Allovue is very much alive and well in the resource planning cloud at PowerSchool, and a huge opportunity to continue expanding and scaling that work. And that was a big part of the impetus. I got to a point where it really did feel like my back was starting to break. And weirdly, it was during the period of the most success we had ever had. It was the years of the greatest growth that I actually felt like I can't do this alone anymore. For some reason, the many years where I maybe could have, should have given up, I felt like I could bear that burden. It was the prospect of seeing more demand and more potential for impact that I couldn't realize alone. That was what really motivated me to say, we need a new partner to make this bigger, better, faster, right? It's like that proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I felt like I was starting to hit that inflection point of it's time to go together. But to your point about the emotional aspect of it, that was a years long personal emotional process. And I would say grieving process in some way.
Totally understandable.
It was really a grieving process. And because, to your point, for so much of my adult life, I was just the founder of Allovue. And it was very jarring to think about a world where I wouldn't wake up. And I mean, in some ways, I'll always be the founder of Allovue, but where things were just a little bit different, that I had to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of reflecting on that. And there were a couple of big aha moments that I had. And I should add that a huge part of this journey, I was literally on a physical journey across the country too. I sold my house in Baltimore in 2022, and I packed up my car and the cat and started driving around the country to get some physical space to process all of this and what I wanted to do next and how I wanted to do it. And there were a couple of things that were big aha realizations for me. One was that when you take VC money, you can very easily fall into the trap that your life's work is to create a VC return and to build a venture-backed company. And I had to remember that that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make every dollar work for every student. And the VC-backed company was a vehicle for realizing that goal for a long time, and a pretty effective one. But it allowed me to reframe, is that still the right vehicle going forward, right? Because we had that option. We could have gone out and raised another round of funding and kept going. That was one path. But I had to really think about, is that the best vehicle for the next leg of this journey? That was one piece. The other piece, which is closely related, is that I got very clear about my values in terms of what this next chapter would look like. What I really honed in on what was important to me. And chief on that list was my team. My team, many of them had been with me for most of the company's existence. Our average tenure on our executive team was 7 years when we did the acquisition. So many of them had been in this with me for a very long time. I wanted to make sure that this was a good outcome for them. And I took my responsibility to them very, very seriously. And then the last piece was, what is best for fulfilling this mission for our current partners, for our future partners, and all of the students that they serve? What's the best way to do this? And if you're at a stage where you're even starting to think about this, I highly recommend you sit with yourself alone for a good long while and get a lot of clarity on that. because what that allowed me to do was to go in that process and say, I don't care about the how, I don't care about the who. This is the why. And this is what is valuable to me in this process. And those were the tests. And to be completely honest, we ended up, because of that, we ended up a world away from where I thought we were going to end up. I actually did think we were going to go the route of bringing in a new capital partner and continuing to grow independently for a little while. I didn't think we were ready to do the acquisition. But when I had those conversations and ran it through that values assessment, ultimately the conversation that I had with PowerSchool was the one that checked the boxes of, this is going to be good for my team, this is going to be good for our mission, and this is going to allow us to expand and continue this work in a way that is values aligned.
There's a power in this that I think not enough is made of for at least the average entrepreneur, which is the VC business and that model. And many of these companies have made it because of the VC business. So this is not a critique. Does become, though, the measuring stick. And I meet these leaders often, right? They're like, well, I'm trying to grow by the rule of 40.
Yeah.
Okay. Why? Go, well, the board and, and right. And when I looked at the portfolio, which is how we describe our view of the market that we've brought to bear, these are all the clients that we work with. The ones who just blew it out of the park during COVID were by and large not investor owned, or if they were, they persisted and never stopped. No layoffs, no change in strategy. And the companies that they're in boards or essentially driving their business, they made rapid layoffs and then couldn't rehire.
Yep.
The people they were trying to rehire were now far more expensive and harder to find. But there's this, it can become an almost infinite road when you're running these businesses. And without that inflection, I think it's very possible to maybe drive the car somewhere that you don't end up wanting to be in the first place.
Yeah. Every time I talk to founders, I remind them that they have options, because it is very easy to feel like you're just on this train and you got to stay on it. But there's a lot of different ways. I mean, first of all, you can make the decision to get on the train to begin with. Mm-hmm. You might have a slower journey, but you might have more control over your ultimate destination or how you get there. And, there's a time and a place for a lot of these different models, depending on the company, depending on the market, depending on the products. I also acknowledge that I don't think we would have gotten to where we were without that capital investment. And so I think there's really a lot of factors to consider. But again, people only see a very narrow slice of the founder world and of these journeys in headlines. Yes. And so it makes sense that's all you know. And that's the only way that you think you can be successful or grow a company. You're not hearing about the many, many founders who choose a different path and don't raise money and stay in control of their destiny and are building very quietly, very successful businesses. But the biggest piece of advice I can give on this is to get crystal clear on your value system, because that will never lead you astray. During some of the darkest days of the pandemic, where we didn't know if we were going to make it through. It was a very, very tough time. I felt like it was effectively a coin toss whether we were going to survive the year at points. And I would go to bed at night and I would say, the company might survive, it might not, but I'm going to have to live with myself the rest of my life. So I should just show up every day in a way that allows me to live with myself the rest of my life and do the best I can for the people that we employ and the people that we serve. And I didn't get everything perfectly right, but there's a lot that I can look back on at that time and feel proud of. And yeah, to your point, you kind of have to drown out a lot of the noise. And, there was a lot of very reactive behavior in that time. And I'm not exaggerating when I would say I would just go take very long walks in the woods every day and just think and be in touch with myself and my values and make these decisions clear-headed and with a longer term view. And ultimately, I really believe that was a lot of what did get us through that year.
Jess, what an incredible story. I think your journey is one that really should be circulated more, in that it does take a lot longer to reach the end, but through that persistence, it's very clear that there is a reward. Jess, we get everybody out of the show with what we call our fast four.
Okay.
So this is like top of your mind, just let it ride. As an entrepreneur, what emerging trends excite you the most?
Okay, I'm really going to go sideways on this.
Okay.
I have been thinking a lot about concepts of community care.
Okay.
I think that we've gone very hard and fast in a direction of all technology, everything, all the time.
Yes.
I think that there is going to be a bit of a reaction to that, and things are going to become more in person, more community oriented, more focused on mutual aid. At least this is what I'm manifesting, because this is the world I want to live in the future.
I do too. So I'll visit.
So I'm actually really interested in things that are maybe leveraging technology to facilitate those moments or those events. But I'm very, very much thinking about concepts of community care and how we build authentic relationships with each other, and how we live in service with each other on this planet. And and really create those authentic in-person moments is something that I've been ruminating a lot on lately.
What's one place in the world everyone must visit?
The place that blew my mind the most on my tour across the country was Desert Sands National Park in New Mexico.
Wow.
It is the closest I have ever felt to being on another planet. It comes out of nowhere. Like, you're driving down this road. It's about 2.5 hours outside of Albuquerque. You're driving down this road. Google Maps is saying in a mile you're going to be here. And you're like, there's a Taco Bell right here. You're telling me some sand dunes are just going to come up out of the earth a mile from here? And they do. And it is a completely otherworldly experience. So while our national parks are still intact, go visit Desert Sands National Park.
Biggest area for growth in the year ahead?
For me,
it could be your choice.
I am continuing to be on a journey for my personal health. I did push that aside for many, many years, and some of it is catching up to me now. I am not 26 anymore like I was when I started Allovue. So I've really been working to make my personal health a big, big priority.
What's one podcast everyone has to be listening to?
I love The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Wow. Okay. That's a great one.
Yes. I'm sorry. We Can Do Hard Things. We Can Do Hard Things. The Hard Thing About Hard Things is a great book that you should also read.
Well, Jess, thank you so much for just sharing an incredible journey and for being a longtime friend in the industry. I personally appreciate that, and for sharing your insights today. It's been wonderful having you on Capital Class.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining today's episode of Capital Class. If you're interested in joining our next discussion, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Capital Class is a venture with the Strategist Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of shows, visit strategistgroup.com. I'm Adam Giery. Class is closed.